Good day, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of FSSC 20,000 additional requirements. We are covering product labeling, and printed materials, which is clause 2.5.2 of the FSSC 20,000 additional requirement version 6. I hope that you find the session informative and valuable. Thank you. In part 4 of the series, we outline the requirements for product labeling and printed materials within the FSSC 22000 framework. These additional requirements ensures clear communication of information on labels and artwork, especially for packaging. So it covers the products and also goes into great detail looking at how is it that the packaging material companies would need to incorporate the artwork approval process and also the procedures that go with it into their food safety management system. So what's on the menu today? We have got the following topics that we'd like to discuss with you, starting with labeling requirements, thereafter moving to unlabeled products. We're then going to look at label claims and verification, and then artwork management and print control, specifically looking at packaging materials, which will be category I. Then we'll move and look at what documents to use and show you possibly some of the examples that you could use, including ones that we recommend from our toolkit. And then the last part, we're going to look at frequently asked questions relating to this clause, as well as audit tips from the audits that we have participated in, that where we were audited or we're auditing FSSC version 6. As we know, we are already on version 6. It's already being audited. We are going to share our experience. What is it that we have found and what is it that you can do better next time you're being audited under this clause. So now let's look at this requirement, which is applicable to all food chain categories. The requirement reads as follows. In addition to clause 8.5.1.3 of ISO 22018, the organization shall ensure that finished products are labeled according to all applicable statutory and regulatory requirements in the country of intended sale, including allergen and customer specific requirements. So let's discuss this requirement. So it's basically an extension of the scope of ISO 22000 clause 8.5.13, which deals with product characteristics. It emphasizes the need and importance of product labeling of finished products, which then shall ensure, or you should ensure, that it complies with all applicable laws, regulations, and customer requirements in the country where the product will be sold. So this includes statutory requirements which relate to laws set by the government that must be followed. It includes regulatory requirements which relate to rules and guidelines set by regulatory bodies. So for example, in South Africa, we could have the regulatory bodies such as the NRCS that specifies maybe how meat should be labeled, how processed meat should be labeled, how maybe the fishing industry should label their products if they intend to sell those products to Europe. So that's what we are looking at, and perhaps there could be statutory requirements and the laws that are set by the government. For example, the labeling regulations, which will be prescribing to the manufacturer what is it that they should be writing or what information needs to be included in their products so that consumers are not misled. It also further talks about allergen information, where it requires that there is clear identification of allergen present in the product. And here you must really be familiar with what is recognized as an allergen in the country where you are sending your product to. So in South Africa, we've got the big 8, for example. In the USA, they've got the big 9. In the EU, they've got the big 14 allergens the last time I checked. So you must ensure that you check what are products or food products or raw materials, rather, or whatever the case may be, that is regarded as an allergen, and you ensure that you include that in your product labeling information. So it's very important that you familiarize yourself with what that country where you're intending to sell your product to, what is it that they would regard as allergen. It additionally also speaks about customer specific requirements, where any additional labeling requests from customers may need to be included on your product. So if they've requested those requirements, then you must ensure that you have included. In fact, it's not may, it reads, the organization shall ensure that finished products are labeled according to all applicable statutory and regulatory requirements in the country of intended sale, including allergen and customer specific requirements. So if there is any additional information that your customer requires you to include, then of course the expectation is that you also include that. So the organization must have a system in place to identify and stay updated, and all relevant labeling requirements for each market must be incorporated. The organization shall ensure that there is a system that ensures that labels are accurate, they're legible, and contain all required information, and also implement a verification process to check label compliance before the product is released. So for example, you have a product positive release criteria where somebody checks against what is the expected label and what is it that is on the current label before the product is deemed to be final or packed or released from the production facility, because you will then have something that confirms that for this type of product, these are the labeling requirements that they should have, and indeed we have met them as a site. You obviously need to maintain records of label approvals and any changes made. Let's look at the examples. What could be the examples? So let's consider a company called Global Snacks. It's a company that we've made up that produces chocolate chip cookies and wants to sell them in both the United States and perhaps countries in the EU. So for the US market, for example, the label must comply with FDA regulations, including the product name. So we are calling it chocolate chip cookies, for example. So we need to verify if indeed, according to the FDA requirements, is that permitted? Can you actually name your product chocolate chip cookies, or there are restrictions? And if indeed you can name your product, you know, what is it that it needs to have? Perhaps there are formulations that are very specific as to what is it that you could regard as chocolate chip cookies. For example, in South Africa, we have boerewors regulations. What could be called a boerewors, and what is it that you can call a sausage? When is it a boerewors? When is it a sausage? So you need to check if you are speaking to the regulations, or you're complying with the regulations, even with the name that you are using for the product, right? So you also would need to perhaps check the net weight in both metric and imperial units, because you are selling the product in the US, and also you do intend to sell it perhaps in the EU as well. You also look at the ingredient list in a descending order of predominance according to the prescriptions of the FDA, and also the allergen statement, because we know that cookies, if it's not gluten-free, it may contain wheat. It may also, if it's not a dairy-free product, milk, and if it's not egg-free, it could contain eggs and also possibly soy. So you also would need to include nutrition facts panel, manufacturer's name and address, lot or batch number for traceability. So those will be the prescriptions that the FDA expects you to comply with if you are selling the product to the US market. So you need to ensure that you are fully compliant with those requirements. Then let's look at the EU market. Additional requirements may include ingredients that may cause allergies or intolerances, which you are required to emphasize, and possibly using a bold font or a bigger font so that the consumer is warned of those ingredients that you have used. The quantitative ingredient declaration or quid for chocolate chips, which is something that we'd expect you to do. The country of origin, where it's coming from. The storage instructions to the consumer. How is it that they should be keeping the product? The use by or best before date. And customer specific requirements could also be things where a major retailer requires Global snacks to include a QR code on the packaging that links to detailed product information and recipes. So that could be something that the customer has prescribed that you need to include, and then you'll be required to include that. To meet these requirements, for example, using the example of global snacks, we would look at the two different markets, the US markets and the EU market. So the first thing will be designing different labels for the US and EU, ensuring that all required information is present and indeed it is accurate, and implement a verification process to check label compliance, including the customer specific QR code that could perhaps be a requirement of the major retailer, where they've said that as part of their requirements for the product that we're selling to the consumers, we need you to include the QR code. That is the requirement that we expect you to comply with. And obviously, if that is an instruction from your customer according to this clause, you would be expected to include that. In some cases, you'll think, the auditor does not know the customer requirements, only to find that because of their exposure to different audits and the requirements of different retailers, they would come knowing that I do know that Pick and Pay, for example, has this specific requirement. Where is it that you have included that as part of your product labeling? Because they are already familiar, they are already exposed to the industry, and it's something that they very much know that it must be included. So you must ensure that you obviously comply with, lest your auditor knows that this is a part of the requirement, especially for larger retailers, maybe Kellogg's, Sainsbury, and all those type of retailers. You must ensure that you maintain those records of label approvals for each market and customer. So if you then follow these requirements, you would be found, I suppose, based on what we have discussed, there shouldn't be any issues of you not complying with this specific requirement under 2.5.2. To summarize, you must ensure that you comply with statutory and regulatory requirements. So labels must indeed adhere to laws and regulations of the country where you want to sell your product. Allergen information must be included, and you must know exactly what is required for each country that you are sending your product to, you're exporting your product to, and ensure that you incorporate the customer specific requirements that they require you to include as part of your product label. So let's read 2.5.2b. It talks about unlabeled products, and the requirement reads as follows: where product is unlabeled, all relevant product information shall be made available to ensure the safe use of the product by the customer or the consumer. In the next slide, we're just going to discuss in detail what this actually means. So for situations where product is labeled, all relevant product information must still be readily available to either the customer or the consumer. This information is crucial for the safe use of the product by the consumer and may include details on ingredients, allergens, storage and handling instructions, best before date, etc. So normally we find this if we are selling bulk products. If maybe you are manufacturing, let's say that you are processing dried pineapples, but maybe you pack them in 50 kgs, and the customer, which will be a middleman, is responsible for putting them in smaller 2 kg pouches, and they are the ones that are intending to then put the final product label. So in such a scenario, obviously you may not necessarily, based on the agreement that you have with that customer, put the small label that you generally put for your own product. But what you then need to do is to have either a COA or a product spec that would go with that product that the middleman would use so that they can properly label the product. Because you may find that you are selling this product in bulk, but you are not disclosing all the information that is necessary for the middleman to properly label the product. So you must ensure that you list, okay, if it is a pineapple, what variety it is, what are the additional things that you have used to make their product. Perhaps you have used certain preservatives, you have used colorants, you have used additives. That also must be included as part of the labeling information. So as I said, you can use a certificate of analysis to prove that based on the agreement that you have with them, these are the things that you have checked for, and it complies with so and so of those requirements. Or alternatively, a product description or a COA or a product spec, whatever that you could assemble to or put in place to ensure that the person who's buying your product is well informed of what is it that you are selling to them. Especially when it relates to information such as allergens, they would need to know if there are any allergens that could be in that bulk product that you are selling to them, because then they will need to ensure that if they are putting it in small packets, they put warnings or precautionary words to warn the consumer that this product could contain maybe sulfites, which some people are allergic to. And also perhaps there is some detailed information that they need to know. Maybe the product is organic, or maybe it's not organic, and perhaps your agreement is that you are selling only an organic product to them. You need to make that very clear on the product label. So generally we would use a COA or a COC or product spec that will send with that particular batch where we have packed the product in bulk. So let's consider an example of a local farmers market where a vendor, let's say it's Green Valley Farms, sells fresh unpackaged produce directly to consumers. So that could be an example. One of their popular items is maybe mixed green salads or mixed salad greens, which are sold in bulk without individual packaging or labels. So despite the lack of traditional labeling, Green Valley Farms is still required to ensure that all relevant product information is readily available to consumers. So how will they ensure that? Let's look at the ingredients. They would have a clear visible sign above the display mixed salad greens listing all the varieties that are included as part of that salad, because it could happen that perhaps some person does not eat certain things. Maybe they don't eat baby spinach, maybe they're allergic to baby kale, whatever the reason is. So they would include that our mixed salad greens contain baby spinach, arugula, red leaf lettuce, and maybe baby kale as part of what is in the mix. So this information helps consumers to understand exactly what they're purchasing, especially important for those with specific dietary preferences or restrictions. Then in terms of allergens, although perhaps the salad greens themselves would not be regarded as allergens, but maybe if you are handling celery, which some countries, especially the EU, regard as an allergen, you may then be obliged to then disclose that in our facility we do handle celery, so there could be cross-contamination, and if there is any issue where you develop an allergy after consuming our product, please inform us if those allergies become severe, so that maybe it will help them to put additional controls in their facility. So the information that you put would then alert the consumers of potential risk that they could be faced if they consume your product. Let's look at storage and handling conditions. This is important because you as a supplier, you want to make sure that the consumer is enjoying your product and handling is in a way that it satisfies their needs. You don't want a consumer that buys a product and they complain that the shelf life was drastically reduced, it didn't last as long as you have said, they feel that you cheated them. So it's important that you include the storage and handling instructions, how best they should handle your product, and what is the best way to enjoy the product that you are selling to them. So a laminated information card could be placed by Green Valley Farms next to the display, providing storage and handling instructions. For example, writing something that for optimal freshness, make sure that you keep it between 2 and 4 degrees, and you must keep it in a perforated plastic bag to maintain humidity. So you can list that as an example. Maybe you can say wash thoroughly before you consuming, because you know that in your facility you don't wash it. So there could be stones, there could be dust, there could be a contaminants that would then make the product not enjoyable to the consumer. You can even write the best before dates that use it within 5 to 7 days of purchase, because you know that if they hand it post the 7 days, then perhaps the product will be spoiled, and then they won't really enjoy your product, and maybe you'll have a lot of customer complaints or even returns because they did not know how long the product must be kept. So additionally, the vendor in this case, which will be Green Valley Farms, must provide the verbal instructions on proper handling if they can during the point of sale. So that is a good practice where you inform the consumer that yes, this baby spinach is fresh. Make sure that you keep it within and use it within 7 days and keep it at this temperature. So that could be regarded as a good practice. So you don't have to do that because, of course, you can imagine if you're a busy stall and people are coming to your stall and you keep on repeating the same thing. Meanwhile, we have written, perhaps you could say that the handling, storage and storage conditions and everything that you need to know about the product is in that card, display card, for example, and say, please read that so that you can best enjoy the product. So the best before date as well, since the produce is sold fresh and unpackaged, a traditional best before date isn't applicable. So instead, Green Valley Farms in this case may use a system to communicate freshness, maybe a chalkboard design that they update and say that today's greens were harvested on this day, and of course make sure that you use them within 5 to 7 days, as we had earlier made that example. So the information card mentioned earlier may include also the guidance on the typical shelf life of the product, as we said, 5 to 7 days, because then the customer at least knows how long that product should they keep it before it becomes perhaps not in the good quality that it could be used. And also remember that customers need to feel good about the product. So if they feel that they did not get to enjoy your product, it's spoiled too fast, then that could be a problem which could affect your brand negatively. Okay, so let's now go through the labeled claims and verification, which is clause 2.5.2c, where a claim is made on the product, label, or packaging. The organization shall maintain evidence of validation to support the claim and shall have verification systems in place, including traceability and mass balance, to ensure product integrity is maintained. So the claims relate to, could be things like allergen, that it is allergen free. It could be nutritional information. It could be that the product is gluten free. It could include the method of production. It could include chain of custody, raw material status, or whatever the case may be. The requirement is that that must be validated by the organization, and you must have a way of verifying that indeed you are, in terms of the methods of production or whatever activities that you are doing, you are complying with that claim validation requirements. For example, validation could include of allergens. It could include a study where you show that if you are using certain acids or if you are cooking at certain temperatures, the protein structure of that particular allergen denatures, or that allergen is removed from the process, whatever the case may be. That will be a study that you are doing. You send it to the lab, you record how you did it, the process flows, the flow rate of whatever that may be a liquid in your lines or your cleaning systems. You record that in a comprehensive validation study, and then maybe the verification could include maybe weekly testing of the rinse water of the product, where you are checking whether that particular allergen is present or absent in that product that you are handling. So that's what this additional requirement requires in this case. Let's delve deeper into this requirement. So it reads as follows: whenever a claim is made on a product label or packaging, the organization must firstly, you maintain evidence of validation. So it could include comprehensive studies that you have done. It could include certifications, perhaps that show that indeed, if I say that this fruit that I'm supplying you is an organic fruit, we did not use any chemicals. So perhaps, you know, an organic status certification. If I say the product is gluten-free, I show the method of how I produce a product. I can even subscribe to or be certified against, you know, that indeed my product is gluten-free. It could be the same thing like plant-based foods. There is no meat that is being used, or whatever the case, you can perhaps be certified against it. Have a third-party auditor coming to certify you and record exactly how your procedures or the method of production are used or are followed in order to produce that final product. You then need to also implement verification system. As I've said, these are the checks that you'll do on regular basis to prove that indeed whatever that you are using or whatever method that you've validated is still functioning as expected. Some people would use perhaps strips for allergens to check if that particular allergen is present in the product, so they would use strips to detect. Some of them they would use maybe protein swabs, you know, whatever that you can use to verify what the method of validation, to show that I have done a comprehensive study, this is what I've done, and then these are the tests that will show me that I am still you know, in line with the parameters that we have set to show that the product, the claim that you are making is in accordance with the validation that we have done. And as I've said, one of that could include audits. Perhaps you do internal audits where you're auditing the method of production, the system that you guys are following. That will be also a form of verification that you may opt for, as long as, if I'm looking at it from a perspective of an outsider or an auditor, I see you have done a validation study, there is a comprehensive study, how did you go about it, to explain to me the methodology that you followed, and then you show me that the test, the verification system verifies the effectiveness or the validity of my validation, and I've proven that the method of verification will give me accurate results that will prove whatever claim that I've made on the product or packaging, then and it has followed some form of scientific reasoning or the manufacturer's instructions or whatever method that you are using, then I would then, as an auditor, have to accept that. But it must be something that is reproducible, that is repeatable, and that follows basic validation processes or methodology rather. Okay, so this specific requirement is only applicable to category I, which is food packaging, and it deals with artwork management and print control, and it reads as follows. For food chain category I, artwork management and print control procedures shall be established and implemented to ensure the printed materials meet applicable customer and legal requirements. The procedure shall address the following as minimum, so which is what we are going to then look at. So the first requirement is that the organization shall establish a process for approving the standard artwork or master sample used for printing. So the first thing is approval of artwork standards for the organization. So it could include a food packaging company creating a digital master file of the artwork for maybe a new cereal box. This file then is reviewed and approved by the marketing team and the compliance department to ensure that it meets brand guidelines and legal requirements. So those maybe would be the people that will be responsible. So once that is approved, then the file will set as a standard for all future print runs. Obviously, generally production would also be involved in that, so you ensure that the marketing and compliance department have gone through it, and then we incorporate production for their input in terms of how this is going to be produced, including the machinery required, maybe even the person who is a designer who is responsible for designing the plates, and also allocating the right equipment for production. It could even include the colors that are being used, and we know that this is how this cereal box should look. So what will then be done is, whenever there is a production run, that master sample will be a standard sample that we will compare all the samples or all the product that we are producing to ensure that everything is aligned. And if there is any discoloration, if maybe some of the font is bigger than expected, the master sample will be the one that will guide us. In terms of this process, it could also include quality control laboratory, where they'll be taking that master sample and doing a comparison to see if indeed it is according to the master sample whenever there is a production run, and they've got a product release criteria where they confirm that indeed their product has been produced as per the master sample that is in place. Now let's look at the change management, where the requirement is that the organization shall implement a system to manage changes made to the artwork, printing specification, and to control obsolete artwork and printed materials. What examples could be discussed here? We could look at a company that will implement a change management system where any modifications to the artwork or print specification will then be documented and approved by a cross-functional team, where each of the departmental heads, for example, from marketing, from production, from quality control, from compliance management, will give approval that indeed this is the we have approved of this change and we have checked that it complies with all the requirements as set out. And then they would say or there will be a person who then gives a final approval before that change is implemented, where everything from compliance, everything from design, everything from perhaps even the quality of the packaging material being used and the practicality of producing it is being checked. And then once it has been done, then we have got a final approval, maybe from the operations manager or the managing director, who signs it off and says indeed then this change can be effected. Then in terms of obsolete files, those are archived and may be labeled as inactive in the digital asset management system to prevent accidental use. And everyone must know that that is an obsolete folder. It cannot be used, and perhaps you can have a system where only a certain person has access to that folder, or only specific people have got access to that folder. Even a matter of, before when I want to access it, somebody must give me approval and co-sign to ensure that there is no way that any unauthorized person can take out that archived or obsolete design and run production with it. In some cases, it may become necessary for the organization to keep that, because you'll find that there's a design that we're using, and maybe that customer has not bought from you for some time, and then you find that 3 years later they come back and say we still want the same design with these minor modifications, and you can still work on that master sample that you have kept in the obsolete folder instead of you starting afresh. So that is what could be something that one could consider here. The next thing is the print run approval, where the organization shall establish each print run to ensure that it's approved against the agreed standard of master sample before release. So here we are looking at ensuring that before a print run begins, the production team prints a sample and compares it with the approved master sample. This sample is then signed off by the quality assurance manager and then also the production manager to ensure that it's consistent and accurate with the original design that maybe was agreed by a cross-functional team with the customer. And generally, the customer would also be involved if perhaps you are packing for them and they've got very specific specifications that you need to comply with. Then the next one looks at error detection, where the organization is required to establish a process to identify and address printing run errors during the run. So the company may perhaps use an inline inspection system during printing, which will automatically detect deviations from the approved artwork, such as maybe color mismatches or misalignments, and any detected error or any triggers that will detect that there is some deviation, and then it will alert the operator to then inform them that something is wrong here. Perhaps a color, there could be an optic sizer, optic color indicator, where it can be able to determine that the color that we have here is actually not according to what we are required to be producing. Perhaps it's too red, it's too yellow, it's too green, whatever the case may be. And that system must allow for immediate corrective action to ensure that we don't have a product that does not comply with the requirements getting out of the system. Then we've got the requirement where the organization is required to implement a system to effectively segregate different print variants to prevent mix-up. So the different product variants, such as such as maybe sizes, the colors that would perhaps, if they are printed in separate batches, we may end up maybe mixing that. So each batch must be clearly labeled and stored in a designated area to prevent mixing, and this will involve the warehouse management system that tracks these batches to ensure correct distribution. And this becomes vital for molding purposes, where the pellets perhaps are of a different color, and perhaps there could be residues of the previous run that are left in the mold. And as you are busy producing maybe a plastic bottle, you find that this mold that is green was left over in the production run, and it then got mixed with the blue one, which will then change the color of that bottle to something that is not really what the organization aims to achieve. So there must be a system where also the operators or whoever is responsible for picking the raw materials, either the pellets, either the triggers, whatever you call it, they know exactly that that is supposed to be used for that run, to prevent a situation where you have got a completely different variant as to what you were expecting as an organization. Then let's look at the unused printed material, where the organization must have a process to account for any unused printed product. So after each print run, the production team must conduct an inventory of unused printed materials. These could maybe be logged in the inventory system, and any excess either is recycled, used as rework, or securely stored for future use, depending on the company's sustainability policy. But you must ensure that you take into account regulatory requirements. For example, in the EU, there are guidelines in terms of how recycled packaging material should be used. So make sure that you are compliant with that. And also, it must be following a process. Some of the organizations that are making modeled plastic bottles, they've got a limit as to how much of the rework they can use, because they want to ensure that the quality is not negatively affected. For example, they will say that we do not use reworks more than 20%, because in our previous validation studies, we have shown that, or it has been shown that once we use more than that, it will affect the quality and the stability of our product. So that's something that one can take into account here. Good day, everyone. So I want to take you through the different examples that you could use to ensure that you meet the requirements of this specific clause. We are going to use our FSSC 22000 document toolkit to take you through the different examples. And then I'll show you, you'll see here clause 2.5.2. I'll show you the different examples that we have compiled to ensure that we meet the requirements of the clause. So first of all is the procedure. You can see that there is a product information and consumer awareness procedure that details all the requirements that relate to this particular product that we have. We first by looking at the regulatory guidelines that govern this procedure based on where the product is being manufactured and is being sold. And in this case, we're assuming that the product is being sold, is being manufactured and sold in South Africa. And at this point,
we are using regulation R146, which is a labeling regulations that falls under the Act 54 of 1972, which is the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectant Act. So in terms of the procedure, it talks about how the pre-packed end product should be. We have got examples where we indicate what should be in the labels of the pre-packed end product. So what is it that should be contained and anything that goes with it. We even make, we have said that it will include the best before label. It will indicate the allergens that are contained, the temperature guidelines, etc. And if once it has been boxed in bulk, what should be in the box, on the box, what should be included. So we have also included even the microbiological criteria of the product. So let me just correct here. And also the organoleptic property. So this could be an example that you have to ensure that you meet the requirements of the additional requirement. But then let's look at other things. It talks about the changeover procedures, making change management. We have got a template here that speaks about change management, how we'll manage the change, starting from production planning, and this is now about packaging. Blow pins installation, cover and cover installation, line clearance, and start up. How we're going to ensure that the labels that we use or the product triggers, whatever that we have used previously, does not get into the next product, in ensuring that we meet the requirements. It also talks about the operational control, the daily startup procedures, the process parameters. In this case, we have got two in-process checks that looks at one is under extrusion blow molding and the other one is under injection blow molding. Then we go further to explain what are the things that we'll do, including the neck fit, the leak test, the drop test, the quality parameters that will need to be done to ensure that the product is in fact what is expected. So it goes on to speak about management of rework, how we're going to manage rework. So we are saying that here a maximum of 7.5 kg regrind is to be used per 25 kg of virgin material, for example. So this is how we will maintain it. Product release, we have specified how product release will be done. In terms of packaging and labeling, we are indicating how that will be done as well. We go further to speak about the storage and distribution of the product, so this will be an example. And then in terms of the forms that one could use, we have got one that we call a line startup form. So you could use the line setup and changeover procedure to indicate that how is it that as an organization, how are you going to do line startup, how are you going to start the line, and how are you going to make sure that you do proper changes to prevent any form of contamination. There is another one that I think would be equally important under this clause, the production line check. So here, that's when we are done with the run and then we are clearing it, for example. So here we indicate the previous run labels and everything that goes with it. We are talking about regrind bins. We are talking about packaging material. So this ensures that you meet those requirements where we are trying to make sure there isn't anything from the previous run that is being used for the current run that you are producing. And if you use a combination of these forms and procedures, surely you would be able to say you have complied with this requirement. If you remember, we also spoke about graphic design and artwork control procedure, who's responsible for it. So in this case, it's for customer branded materials, the general manager, and then artwork management, the approval of artwork standard or master sample is the responsibility of the general manager and the technical manager. So that has been specified, and we have specified how management of artwork and print specification should be done, including obsolete and printed materials. We have spoken about detecting and identifying printing errors, how that will be done, and how are we going to account for any unused print material and the different responsibilities that each of the people that we have in the team carry. So I think with all these procedures, we have made sure that all the requirements under 2.5.2 relating to product labeling as well as artwork management or printed materials under category I, we have made sure that all that is being complied with. There are obviously more documents in our toolkit. You are more than welcome to explore and find additional documents that you could use. That is me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for paying attention. All the best. Right, okay, so now let's look at the frequently asked questions, FAQs. Based on what we have had previously and some of one or two audit tips that we think will be valuable to you. So the first question is, how should claims on product labels be validated and verified? So in this case, organization can maintain the evidence of validation for claims such as laboratory testing. For example, for allergens, you could have a validation study that you have done in collaboration with an accredited laboratory, and once you have done that study, of course, you'll maintain it as relevant information to support your validation. And of course, the methodology that you followed, what are the allergens that you were looking at, and of course, whatever that the claim that you are making must be something that you have done for a similar product, following through the similar processes or methodologies, and then that would be taken as validation. And of course, verifications could include traceability studies that you have done, the testing that you are doing with internally, but maybe by your laboratory personnel, and then you keep that as a records. So another one was, what evidence is needed to support a claim like organic on product labels? So the evidence could include product test results for synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. It could include organic certification scheme that you're participating in, and records of chain of custody throughout the value chain. And then in terms of the verification plans, they could include product test to support that claim, where you test your product for MRLs, for example, where it will be indicated that indeed there are no chemical residues that are present on your product. And then another question is, what procedures must be in place for artwork management and control? So as long as your procedures ensure printed material meets custom and legal requirements, and it includes approval of artwork, who is responsible for it, how it's done, how the changes are managed, how you detect the errors, and how you segregate your print variants, I think that will be then sufficient. I also want to just mention the audit tips relating to this clause. Make sure that you maintain as much documentation as possible, and that documentation that you maintain must be detailed, and it must include all the requirements that are prescribed by this specific clause to ensure that there is nothing that you have missed, and make sure that whenever there are changes, you are updated accordingly. There is also perhaps another weakness that we have spotted that relates to artwork approval processes, where the procedures are not clear who's responsible for approval, especially for customer branded materials. So make sure that that is very, very clear. It's quite detailed, and also you specify the management of artwork and print specifications and who is actually responsible for what, including the customer. What is it that they are responsible for, and what is it that you as a company are responsible for? And you should ensure that you regularly review and update these procedures to ensure that they comply with customer and the latest regulatory requirements. I think that will be sufficient for today. Thank you. Right, we have reached the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for paying attention. I really do hope that you have found part 4 very, very, very informative. I'm looking forward to engaging with you on part 5. Thank you.